Rise of the European Emperor by Taishan Laonyo.
Chapter 471 We won. Southwest of Lübeck, Frederick III, the Elector of Saxony, led more than 500 Saxon knights, lightly armed, 1 man and 2 horses, desperately fleeing south. On the side of the Elbe-Lübeck Canal, Frederick III found the port where the Bosse coalition had docked before, as well as the hundreds of boatmen who stayed behind. After arriving at this temporary port, Frederick III decisively ordered the boatmen to drive all the boats to the south bank, and at the same time transport his men and war horses over. After arriving at the south bank of the canal, Frederick III ordered all the boats to be burned to avoid being used by the pursuers. As for the boatmen, they were all dismissed. When Lowe followed the traces again with 500 scouts, he saw the burning boats on the opposite side. Obviously, the other side blocked the road. At this time, even if he found a boat, it would be difficult to transport hundreds of cavalry and war horses together. Therefore, Lowe would definitely not catch up with Frederick III and his party. In desperation, Lowe had to lead his men back. On the battlefield, after Wolf Esprand took control of the Golden Carriage, he was attacked by the enemy's crazy counterattack. Fortunately, the 8,000 veterans he brought were all elite and resisted the enemy's counterattack. Seeing that those people were about to launch another wave of counterattacks, Wolf Esprand made a decisive decision to pull Joachim I out, put a knife on his neck, and threaten those counterattacking enemies. However, because Frederick III, the Elector of Saxony, ran away, even if Joachim I was pulled out, it would not be convincing. Moreover, Wolf Esprand knew very well that Frederick III was the chief officer of this coalition army. Frustrated, Wolf Esprand suddenly saw the gorgeous silk robe that Frederick III had changed out of the carriage, so he asked, "Is this what Elector Frederick left behind?" "Yes, yes." Joachim I was a prisoner at this time, and he was very honest to avoid bad luck. Wolf Esprand rolled his eyes, and suddenly waved a few guards over and asked Joachim I, which one of them looks like Elector Frederick. Joachim I did not understand what Wolf Esprand meant, but still pointed at a bearded guard and said honestly, "He is more similar." Then, in the stunned eyes of Joachim I, Wolf Esprand asked the bearded guard to change into Frederick III's gorgeous silk robe and golden crown. "If you don't pay attention and look from a distance, he really looks like Frederick III." Then, this bearded guard pretending to be Frederick III, together with Joachim I, was taken to the top of the golden carriage and a sword was also placed on his neck. Wolf Esprand also stood on the top of the golden carriage, and shouted to the soldiers of the Bosse coalition who were still resisting with a trumpet, "Warriors of Brandenburg and Saxony, your elector has been captured by me. If you continue to resist, I will chop off your elector." After saying that, Wolf Esprand really picked up the knife and made a gesture of chopping off the head, which scared Joachim I so much that he closed his eyes. The guard who was ordered by Wolf Esprand to play Frederick III cleverly took the opportunity to lower his head, looking like he was scared. In fact, he lowered his head because he was afraid that the approaching enemy would recognize his true face. With his head lowered and his body similar to the Swiss, it was difficult for others to tell them apart. Wolf Esprand then used a trumpet to shout to the Swiss mercenaries, "Swiss mercenaries, you are fighting for money. Now, your 2 employers have been captured alive, and no one will pay you commissions anymore. Why are you still fighting? Our East Frisian army treats prisoners well, and will never kill or abuse them. So, surrender." Before Wolf Esprand shouted, the battlefield was in chaos. The Swiss mercenaries and Brandenburg troops in the front row were fighting with Marin's army, and didn't pay any attention to what was happening in the rear. The Saxon army, which had just driven away the Brandenburg and Saxon civilians in the front row, was reorganizing. After hearing Wolf Esprand's shouting, the Bosse coalition soldiers who were fighting in the front row turned around in surprise and observed the situation. Marin's army was also attracted by the shouting and temporarily suspended its offensive. The tall soldiers of the Bosse coalition were surprised to find that the golden command carriage of their army was indeed controlled by the enemy. The 2 electors had been put on their necks with knives. Suddenly, the soldiers of the Bosse coalition were all furious. "Damn, the leader was captured and had a knife on his neck, what the hell?" The soldiers who wanted to take back their boss at the rear of the army were afraid to move, fearing that Wolf Esprand would be unhappy and chop his boss. Marin was also very happy to see that Wolf Esprand succeeded. So, he took the opportunity to shout, "Put down your weapons. Surrender and you will not be killed." The East Frisian soldiers around him heard the boss take the lead in shouting, and they shouted in unison, "Put down your weapons. Surrender and you will not be killed. Put down your weapons. Surrender and you will not be killed." The soldiers of the Bosse coalition, who were frightened by the neat shouting, hesitated for a moment. The Brandenburg army, which had annihilated 3,000 knights by Marin's army, was the worst. Because the elite were gone, the remaining infantry naturally had no hope. In addition, the boss was captured alive and had a knife on his neck, and the infantry officers had even less confidence. So, many Brandenburg infantry officers took the lead in putting down their weapons. Then, the soldiers around them followed suit and put down their weapons and surrendered. As for the Saxon army, seeing that there was no hope, and their own boss had a knife on his neck and was scared to bow his head, they naturally felt that there was no hope. So, they also put down their weapons. Only the Swiss mercenaries were at a loss. Although they did not lose in the battle with Marin's army, the soldiers of the Brandenburg and Saxon armies on the left and right sides have surrendered. In front of them are the 20,000 main forces of Marin, and behind them are the 8,000 elite troops led by Wolf Esperand. Even if they want to leave, there is no way to escape. So, when Marin sent people to take over the prisoners of war from the Brandenburg and Saxon armies, the Swiss shrank their defenses and formed a large self-protection square with 4 directions facing outward, refusing to surrender to Marin. However, as the soldiers of Brandenburg and Saxon on both wings were taken aside, the area around the Swiss suddenly became empty. More than 3,000 musketeers under Marin took the opportunity to enter the camp, raised their muskets, and aimed at the approximately 18,000 Swiss mercenaries who refused to surrender. At the same time, more than 10,000 English mercenaries under Sakura also took out 8,000 people to surround the Swiss mercenaries. Seeing the Swiss mercenaries trapped to death in the camp, Marin breathed a sigh of relief and said, "We won." Chapter 472, No shortage of labor for digging the canal. In fact, the Swiss also understood at this time that they had already lost. The collapse of the Allies made the remaining 18,000 Swiss mercenaries isolated. Moreover, they also saw that Marin's total strength was definitely twice that of their own. Moreover, through the direct confrontation just now, they were surprised to find that the opponent's combat effectiveness was not much worse than that of the Swiss. If the number of people was the same, they might have confidence. However, the opponent had so many people, and their allies collapsed again. This battle really couldn't be fought. Not only that, they also knew very well that the advantage of the East Frisian army was not close combat, but those muskets. But the problem is that the opponent's close combat troops seem to have good combat effectiveness. Now that the space is freed up, the opponent's musketeers are in place. If they continue to fight, it seems that their side will be finished. In fact, as mercenaries, the Swiss are not worried about the outcome of the war at this moment, but the ransom issue. Yes, as mercenaries, the Swiss value money very much. They know that if the entire army is captured, the ransom required for these 18,000 people can drag down the economy of the Swiss alliance. And this is the reason why the Swiss hesitated and refused to surrender. If these 18,000 people surrendered and were captured, Marin would ask the Swiss alliance for a ransom. So many Swiss mercenaries, their ransom price must be higher than that of ordinary infantry, and may be close to the ransom of those knights. So many people will definitely cause the Swiss alliance's finances to collapse. So, after a long standoff, the Swiss sent representatives to discuss with Marin whether they could leave safely, or don't ask for a ransom. Marin was not willing. If he let the Swiss go so easily, where would his face be? Moreover, if his enemies knew about it, they would think he was afraid of the Swiss. What if they continued to hire the Swiss to fight against themselves in the future? Therefore, it was impossible to let the Swiss go easily. However, if you want to launch a general attack on these Swiss, it doesn't seem to be too advantageous. In particular, now that their own army has no trench cover, and no chariots are brought in. In this way, once the fight starts, there is nothing to stop the Swiss attack. Once the Swiss put up a desperate fight, in the end, even if they could win, the price they paid would certainly be heavy. Therefore, the negotiations between the two sides came to a stalemate. However, Marin was not in a hurry. After all, it was the Swiss who were surrounded, not his own army. So, Marin led his men to fight the Swiss. At noon, Marin asked his men to take turns eating black bread to fill their stomachs. The Swiss in the encirclement were not so lucky. Their food was in the camp at the back, not on their bodies. So, at noon, they could only watch their opponents eating bread there. And they could only endure hunger. It's not that they didn't want to snatch the bread from Marin's soldiers, but Marin asked his men to eat bread in batches. Just like the three-stage shooting, the first row retreated to the back to eat bread, and the second row temporarily pushed forward to guard against the Swiss counterattack. Then, the second row went down to eat bread, and the third row continued to monitor the Swiss on top. Even if the Swiss wanted to launch a sneak attack, they couldn't find any opportunities. Moreover, facing the dominant East Frisian army, they could not escape the fate of destruction even if they fought hard. At most, they would drag a few thousand more enemies to die together. By the evening, the Swiss were already starving, but Marin's men continued to eat bread leisurely. Moreover, those soldiers deliberately chewed loudly, which made the Swiss uncomfortable. In the end, the Swiss sent people to negotiate again, expressing their willingness to pay some price. However, they could not pay the ransom. Marin was also a little shocked. The Swiss really wanted money but not life. Seeing that it was getting dark, Marin was actually scratching his head. Because, after dark, it would be easier for the Swiss to break through. After all, the soldiers under his command would also be sleepy when it was dark. By then, if the Swiss found an opportunity, they might really break through. So, Marin decided to make some concessions. Of course, he couldn't lose face. After thinking it over again and again, Marin finally put forward his own request. He could not ask for a ransom, but these 18,000 Swiss people had to help him dig the canal near the city of Munster, which was the small canal connecting the Ems River and the Lippe River. The workload was not large. Now, Marin has captured nearly 28,000 Brandenburg and Saxony militiamen, as well as 27,000 soldiers of the Böse coalition. Together, there are about 55,000 captives. And these people are all good laborers. Counting the remaining 18,000 Swiss mercenaries, if everyone works together, the small canal can be dug in a few months. After all, this adds up to 73,000 strong laborers. After the Swiss envoys went back, the Swiss officers began to discuss. They believed that Marin did this obviously to maintain his face. Otherwise, it would be very embarrassing to release people unconditionally after winning the battle. Moreover, it would not take long to dig the small canal. At most, it is equivalent to the Swiss working for nothing for a few months. If they were taken as prisoners and asked for a ransom, each Swiss mercenary might be asked for a huge ransom of 1 or 200 gold coins. After all, Swiss mercenaries are the most expensive infantry in Europe. It's not that the Swiss can't come up with so much money, but that after taking it out, the Swiss will go bankrupt. For this group of Swiss mercenaries who want money but not their lives, that is absolutely unacceptable. So the Swiss sent representatives again to Marin and asked to sign a treaty, clearly stating that the Swiss can help dig the small canal, but Marin must not ask for a ransom from Switzerland. Moreover, Marin needs to swear on the Bible that he agrees to this and must not kill prisoners. As long as Marin agrees to this, the Swiss are willing to surrender collectively. Seeing that the Swiss are surrounded and still so arrogant, Marin is very upset. However, in order to reduce his own casualties, Marin is still ready to agree. However, Marin is not so kind. He knows very well that most of the Swiss are here. At this time, the Swiss alliance's military strength is very empty. He can indeed meet the Swiss's request for no ransom. However, Marin could instigate Emperor Maximilian I to invade Switzerland while the Swiss alliance was short of troops. Most of the Swiss mercenaries were forced to dig canals, so there must be no troops in the country. No matter how poor the combat effectiveness of Maximilian I's army was, he would not be unable to defeat the Swiss alliance, which lacked troops, right? At that time, the Swiss would help him dig a canal, and he could make the emperor owe him a favor, which was simply too good. The reason why Marin was so hostile to Switzerland was that a Protestant branch would emerge in Switzerland a few decades later, Calvinism. This Protestant sect is also known as Puritans, Britain, or Huguenots, France. The Protestants of this sect have a very bad hobby, that is, chopping off the king's head. Charles I was beheaded by the Puritans, and Louis XVI was beheaded, and there was also a shadow of the French Huguenots. And Marin was going to be a king in the future, although he was not afraid of challenges when he was alive. However, he was worried that his descendants would be beheaded by Calvinist revolutionaries. Therefore, the Swiss alliance must be eliminated. And now is a good opportunity. I have captured most of the Swiss mercenaries, and Switzerland must be short of troops at this time. Let the Habsburg family send troops to attack Switzerland, and there is still a great chance of victory. However, even if the Habsburg family conquers Switzerland, there will definitely be constant rebellion in the future, which is equivalent to carrying a huge burden. After all, the Swiss people are fierce and easy to cause trouble. At that time, the Habsburg family must be in pain and happiness, and don't think about living in peace. However, they still have to accept a huge favor from themselves. After all, they can't beat the Swiss alliance under normal circumstances with their own strength. Thinking of this, Marin laughed obscenely. Then, he agreed to the Swiss's request, and in front of the Swiss, he swore not to ask Switzerland for ransom, nor to kill prisoners, but just let the Swiss dig a canal for a few months. However, Marin can completely raise the standard of the previous small canal to the level of a medium-sized canal. In this way, the workload will be greatly increased, and the Swiss will probably have to dig for a full year to dig the canal. And 1 year was enough for the Habsburgs to conquer Switzerland, which was short of manpower. Chapter 473 Customizing a large number of fetters. After signing the agreement with the Swiss and swearing in public, this large-scale battle involving 88,000 soldiers came to an end. However, because of the fierce close combat in such a small place in the Bossa coalition camp, the casualties this time were still relatively large. According to post-war statistics, the Swiss lost 2,000 soldiers in this war, mainly the old, weak and new recruits in the rear who were attacked by Wolf Espernd, while the Brandenburg and Saxon armies lost a total of about 3,000 people, mainly the Brandenburg army. Because the Saxon army was disrupted by those civilians, there was no chance to fight head-on with the East Frisian army, so naturally the losses were less. But it didn't matter. Because even if the Saxon army suffered less casualties, except for the more than 500 knights who escaped and Frederick III himself, everyone else was captured. In the end, these people were all exchanged for ransom. Sometimes, those nobles would rather their men die in battle than see them captured. Because the finances of the nobles were not good, and paying the ransom would bankrupt their finances. The situation was different for the dead subordinates. There was no pension in this era. If they died, they died. At most, they were given an honor, but honor was worthless and was just a casual title. Even if the nobles died in battle, at most their heirs would succeed them, and then their heirs would be compensated with some official positions. The worst thing was that the nobles under their command were captured. As a lord, it was necessary to redeem your subordinates. Otherwise, if you were unwilling to redeem your subordinates, no one would be willing to follow you to fight next time. In addition, when the Saxon army resisted the attack of 30,000 civilians from Brandenburg and Saxony, it was ruthless and directly killed 2,000 civilians, which made Marin heartbroken. You know, according to this situation, it would be good for the electorate of Saxony and the electorate of Brandenburg to redeem all the captured soldiers. As for the 20,000 or 30,000 civilians, it is estimated that they have no money to redeem them. At that time, these people will be blackened by Marin and become subjects of East Frisia. These people are not soldiers, they are all serfs anyway. Who are they to be serfs? It just so happens that Marin's territory is expanding now, and he also needs a lot of labor. And most of the captured soldiers will be redeemed, and there is no possibility of being absorbed and digested by Marin. Therefore, in Marin's eyes, the civilians are more precious. Therefore, Marin is still very sad about the loss of more than 2,000 civilians. These are the losses of the enemy, and Marin's losses are not small. Because they forced into the enemy's camp, they had a fierce hand-to-hand fight with the enemy. Therefore, after this war, more than 2,500 people under Marin were injured. Fortunately, because Marin's men were all wearing armor. The main force wore plate armor, and ordinary soldiers also had mahjong mats to wear armor. Because the wood chips armor resisted many fatal injuries, although there were more wounded under Marin, there were not many direct deaths, only less than 400 people. The remaining more than 2,100 people were all wounded. With the treatment of alcohol, gauze and gold wound medicine specially prepared by Marin, it is estimated that most of the wounded can be saved. For the wounded of the Bossa coalition, Marin secretly treated them differently. Those wounded knights who were valuable, for ransom, Marin ordered good medical treatment. As for those ordinary infantrymen, except for officers who could exchange for some money, ordinary enemy infantrymen were directly abandoned. As for the Swiss mercenaries, Marin ignored the more than 1,000 wounded. After all, the Swiss in his camp did not ask for ransom. Since it is not worth money, save AP. Anyway, the Swiss people can't have a good relationship with themselves. He would be happy if the other side had a few more soldiers killed. On the contrary, Marin gave good medical conditions to those injured civilians. After all, Marin still hoped to pull these civilians under his command as serfs. Because there were too many people, it took 3 days to sort out the entire camp and prisoners. Moreover, after the victory, Marin also rescued the 15,000 civilians sent by the Duchy of Schleswig who were imprisoned in the north of the Bossa coalition camp. By the way, the 10,000 civilians captured in Hamburg were also sent home. After several days of busy work, Marin sorted out various affairs and completed various statistics. Then, the first thing Marin had to do was to customize a large number of shackles. Why customize a large number of shackles? Because there are too many ruthless people among these prisoners of war. Let's not talk about anything else, just say that the 18,000 Swiss prisoners of war, most of them are veteran mercenaries, and they are all villains who kill without blinking. For such people, although Marin needs them to help dig the canal, they must also guard against riots and escape. Therefore, it is necessary to put heavy shackles on them. Otherwise, Marin is not at ease. Similarly, it is necessary to put shackles on the knight captives from Saxony and Brandenburg to prevent them from rioting and escaping. After all, no matter which knight, he is a powerful existence who has practiced martial arts since childhood. If there are no restrictions, and they are rashly sent to the canal digging site, the possibility of escape is extremely high. Putting heavy shackles on them will not only make them slow to run, but also make it impossible for them to escape on horseback. And running away on foot with shackles will easily be caught up by Marin's cavalry. Moreover, after putting shackles on these dangerous elements, they can also face reality and dare not resist or escape casually. In this way, Marin can also send fewer soldiers to supervise their labor. For those infantry prisoners, Marin decided to customize steel shackles only for the officers and elites. For those old, weak and disabled, only wooden shackles are planned. As for how to distinguish the elite and the old and weak in the infantry, that is too simple. As long as they are enthroned as prisoners, they can be distinguished by looking at whether they are in the front row or the back row. In this era, the custom on the European battlefield is to put veterans and elites in the front row, and most of the old, weak and new recruits in the back row. For the remaining civilians, Marin did not plan to put shackles on them. Just send a few light cavalry to watch on the side. Even if there are only a few hundred cavalry, it is enough to deter the 28,000 civilians. Because those civilians who were born as serfs have no courage to resist. Finally, after statistics, Marin found that 25,000 pairs of iron shackles were needed. This number shocked Marin. You know, this era is not an era of mechanized mass production. Each pair of iron shackles needs to be carefully made by a blacksmith who is proficient in making locks. Generally speaking, it takes a blacksmith several hours to make a pair of shackles by hand. In a day, a skilled blacksmith can't make a few iron shackles. So, this is a big order. Even if an order is placed, it will take a long time to receive the goods. After all, it takes a long time for blacksmiths to make so many shackles. Obviously, Marin doesn't have so many blacksmiths. There are only dozens of blacksmiths with the army. Moreover, most of them are not proficient in making locks. In desperation, Marin had to borrow the methods of some shell companies in his previous life, outsourcing. Marin's men were short of blacksmiths, but there were two large commercial cities, Lübeck and Hamburg, and some other cities nearby. In short, every city, even every town, should have blacksmiths who were proficient in making locks. At that time, he would directly ask the merchants in Lübeck and Hamburg, who had more connections, to help him contact blacksmiths from all over the country, and he should be able to gather 25,000 pairs of iron shackles soon. Because there were too many fierce men among the prisoners of war, Marin did not dare to be careless, and arranged a large number of soldiers to take turns on duty every day to prevent anyone from escaping. In order to better control these prisoners of war, Marin separated the strong and the old and weak, and commanded tens of thousands of civilians to build a huge earth wall, driving the most dangerous 25,000 prisoners of war into the wall. Then, soldiers were sent to closely guard the walls around the walls every day to prevent dangerous elements from escaping. Only when the 25,000 pairs of custom-made iron shackles have arrived and can be used to easily control those dangerous elements, will Marin feel at ease to send troops to escort these prisoners back to the country to participate in the excavation of the canal. Chapter 474, The Awe of Allies. Marin still stayed in the original camp of the Bossa coalition with his men, guarding the more dangerous prisoners of war. The order for 25,000 pairs of iron shackles was also sent to the cities of Lübeck and Hamburg. Suddenly, the two cities were boiling. The people of Lübeck and Hamburg took to the streets to celebrate the hard-won victory. Especially those Hanseatic merchants, it was like a big stone fell to the ground in their hearts. Because victory means that they can't be plundered by the Bossa coalition. You know, in this era, it was a daily routine for the army to rob the whole city after breaking the city. Except for a small number of people who surrendered to the other side early, most of the other Hanseatic merchants would be robbed of their wealth by the enemy who broke the city, and they would never recover from it. Therefore, Marin led his troops to defeat the extremely powerful Bossa coalition, which was equivalent to saving their property in saving their rich life. The parliamentarians of Lübeck and Hamburg were even more overjoyed. Marin's victory not only meant that the wealth of the people of Lübeck and Hamburg was preserved, but also meant that the political rights of the original powerful classes in Lübeck and Hamburg were also preserved. If the two cities were conquered by the Bossa coalition, they would inevitably step down. Maybe there would be disasters of killing. You know, most of these parliamentarians are from big merchant families, not nobles. In this era, non-nobles belong to the sequence of being killed. If they fall into the hands of the enemy, the end will not be good. For this reason, the dignitaries of Lübeck and Hamburg each held a grand banquet and dance, inviting Marin to participate. Marin actually didn't like this kind of party, but he couldn't refuse the invitation of his allies. However, after thinking about it, Marin not only agreed to the banquet, but also planned to do something else. What does Marin want to do? He plans to show off his military power in front of his allies. Why show off his military power? That's because Marin wanted to get more of the enemy's compensation after the war. This battle with an astonishing total force was not exciting enough. But anyway, Marin won. And the 38,000 troops were also shown to all Europeans for the first time. With so many troops, no force in the German region can gather them in wartime. Therefore, when Marin's strength is revealed, it will inevitably shock Germany. Moreover, this time, Marin defeated the extremely powerful combination of the electorate of Saxony, the electorate of Brandenburg, and 20,000 Swiss mercenaries. After this battle, Marin's influence in the German region will be no less than that of any elector. Therefore, East Frisia has officially risen. Not only that, after this victory, Marin plans to take away large tracts of land from Brandenburg, Saxony, and Denmark. Even Marin began to covet the throne of the Kingdom of Norway. But the problem is that in this war, Marin nominally fought with Lübeck and Hamburg. Although the army of Lübeck and Hamburg is very scum. However, they are allies after all. But the problem is that in this war, Lübeck and Hamburg made very little contribution to the war. When the time comes, when the fruits of victory are divided, they will be divided equally among them, and Marin will definitely feel uncomfortable. Therefore, Marin decided to fully demonstrate his military power to his allies when entering the city, and deter his allies. In this way, when dividing the fruits of victory, he can get more initiative. To be honest, for the victory of this war, Marin does not intend to take the ransom alone. Anyway, he is not short of money. However, Marin is very ambitious about the land and wants to eat alone. According to Marin's plan, he plans to snatch the Jutland Peninsula in Denmark this time. If possible, the territory of the Kingdom of Norway, including the crown, will also be snatched. This is a big fat piece of meat, and Marin is not willing to share it with Lübeck and Hamburg. Besides, Lübeck and Hamburg already have money. If they are given a large area of land and population, wouldn't that create opponents for hegemony for themselves? Therefore, Marin made up his mind that he would not let Lübeck and Hamburg get the ceded land this time. As for money, we can give them some. Anyway, these two cities already have money, and giving them money is just icing on the cake. Moreover, for those Hanseatic merchants, perhaps money can attract them more than land. After making up his mind, Marin specially selected Kahn and brought 250 muscle sticks of the Wolf-Fang Commando with him. These muscle sticks wore half-body plate armor and carried maces, looking extremely tough. In order to further show the lethality of these muscle sticks, Marin specially ordered that the blood stains on the plate armor must not be washed off, and let the people of Lübeck and Hamburg see their illustrious martial arts. In addition to these 250 tough Wolf-Fang Commando warriors, Marin also selected the 1,000 lancers to accompany them. These lancers are all wandering knights from knight families. Because of genetic factors and sufficient nutrition since childhood, they are all tall. After wearing breastplate armor and helmets, these guys look taller and more heroic, and also very deterrent. In order to create a terrifying effect, Marin also specially asked people to kill several draft horses in the barracks and smear the blood on the armor of these guys, as if they were covered with the blood of the enemy, which made them look more scary. In addition, Marin also asked people to transport half of the captured weapons, armor and horses into the city together. As spoils of war, they were divided among the two cities. Similarly, Marin deliberately asked his men not to wipe the blood on these weapons and armor, so as to shock the people of Lübeck and Hamburg. As for the horses, Marin also made some moves. Most of the horses he selected for Lübeck and Hamburg were draft horses. And the war horses were naturally mostly blackened by Marin. Among the thousands of horses that Marin brought to Lübeck and Hamburg, only the dozens in the front row were authentic war horses, and the ones behind were all draft horses that knights changed to. In this way, when Marin brought more than 1,000 soldiers with bloodstains on their armor into the city at a very neat pace, it really gave the people of Lübeck and Hamburg a great shock. In the eyes of those merchants who don't understand war, these East Frisian tough guys with bloodstains on their armor are like demons from hell, murderous and scary. In fact, these men are not only strong, but also have seen blood, and they do have a murderous aura. With the bloodstains of armor as a backdrop, they really look like demons from hell, which is very shocking. As Marin expected, when he led such a bloodstained army into the city, mighty and high-spirited, both the councillors of Lübeck and Hamburg were shocked. This led to the fact that after the banquet began, the councillors of Lübeck and Hamburg looked at Marin with awe. As for those ordinary Hanseatic merchants, they were so frightened that many people did not dare to come to Marin to toast. Because, although Marin came to the banquet, he was not wearing the noble silk robes usually used for banquets, but a breastplate armor that was stained with blood and even had a few scratches. In addition, Marin's face was full of seriousness, and it was almost written on his face that, no strangers allowed. Moreover, standing behind Marin were Khan and a group of specially selected men with the most murderous aura. They all had murderous auras on their faces, as if they wanted to eat people. Therefore, except for some brave congressmen who dared to come over to toast, others were directly scared and dared not get close. And this was exactly the effect Marin wanted to achieve. Chapter 475, The Best Actor and the Division of Interests, Part 1. This grand banquet jointly held by the dignitaries of Lübeck and Hamburg, the last chapter said that they were held separately, which has been revised, is actually just an appetizer. Marin has no interest in the subsequent dance. After all, he is not and he is not a person who can't run away when he sees a woman. In fact, the main reason is that in this era, most noble women, following the deception of the church, do not like to take a bath. Although they put a lot of perfume on their bodies, they still can't cover up the stinky smell of not taking a bath for a long time. The strong smell of perfume is mixed with a stinky smell, which is sour. Marin has no interest in hunting for beauty, and even feels disgusted. The reason why Marin likes his wife Angela is because Angela was abducted home by Marin a long time ago, and cultivated Angela's good habit of taking a bath. Facing a fragrant and clean wife, Marin certainly likes it. As for those ladies and young ladies with strong perfume and stinky smell on them, Marin has no interest. In a peaceful atmosphere, everyone is full of wine and food. At this time, the European courts did not have a separate dining system, but public knives and forks and public plates. Even the forks for eating did not have 4 prongs, but only 2 prongs. As for the separate dining system, although it originated in the 16th century, it was only 1505 and had not yet become popular. When eating, Khan relied on his strong body to grab a large plate of roast beef for Marin, and did not allow others to come close to share. This was mainly because public dishes were also popular in Europe at that time, and roast meat was placed on a large plate. If you want to eat, just take your own knife and fork, cut a piece and go. Even the hands that dipped pepper and sauce were all used by hand. Grabbing pepper with your hands is reasonable, after all, it is dry powder. But grabbing sauce with your hands, Marin dare not look. So, he let Khan rudely grab a large plate of beef and eat it slowly by himself, so as to avoid others coming to share with their saliva-stained knives and forks. Of course, Marin could not finish a large plate of roast beef, and most of it was shared with Khan and the guards around him. Marin had no objection to sharing food with Khan and his guards. After all, Khan and the other guards were all young and strong men in good health. However, it was hard to say about those old counselors and wealthy people. If they infected him with some disease, it would be terrible. After dinner, it was time for the dance. However, Marin was very reluctant to dance with those noble ladies and young ladies who were full of strong perfume and sour smell. However, as the leader and hero of this war, Marin was very popular with those noble ladies and girls, and there was an endless stream of women who came to invite him to dance. Fortunately, Marin was smart and had been prepared. Just when several noble ladies and girls surrounded Marin and invited him to dance, Marin was suddenly possessed by Hujianhua and spit out a mouthful of blood. Then, those noble ladies and girls were scared and screamed and ran away. Marin fell on Khan, and Khan quickly took out a handkerchief to wipe the blood from the corner of Marin's mouth. Seeing that the protagonist of the dance party vomited blood, the whole audience was in a panic, and many people came to greet Marin's situation. Leaning on Khan's shoulder, Marin said to everyone weakly, "It's okay. It's just that during the decisive battle the day before yesterday, I was hit in the chest by the enemy's weapon, which caused some internal injuries." Everyone looked at the blood and obvious scratches on Marin's chest armor, and seemed to understand. But in fact, Marin was hiding among the soldiers in the battle, and there were at least 200 or 300 guards wearing plate armor around him. He would be injured. It's just an excuse. Moreover, this can also show how desperate Marin was in this war, and how to seek more benefits during the negotiation of the distribution of the fruits of victory. "You see, we are vomiting blood, and you don't give me more benefits." Of course, the vomiting blood is also fake. While picking his teeth at dinner, Marin took the opportunity to stuff a pig bladder filled with cow blood into his mouth. Of course it was washed clean. Originally, Marin planned to bite it later, mainly to show a tragic look during the negotiation. However, seeing those smelly ladies and noble ladies surrounding him and inviting him to dance, Marin didn't want to dance with these smelly women for a long time, so he simply launched a big move in advance, Hujianhua-style vomiting blood. Marin bit the pig's bladder and quickly vomited a large mouthful of blood, then fell to the side softly. On the side, the supporting actor Khan, who had rehearsed long ago, supported Marin in time and pretended to be anxious and shouted, "Master, master. What's wrong with you? Don't scare me." In an instant, Khan also turned into a roaring emperor. Watching Khan's wonderful performance, Marin glanced at Khan sideways. "Paralysis, you want to steal my Best Actor award? Remember, you are just a supporting actor." After a look, Khan immediately took out a large handkerchief, covered Marin's mouth and wiped it, and by the way, wrapped the pig's bladder that Marin vomited in it and took it away and hid it. As for the pale face of the old cadre when he vomited blood, this is not a problem. Because Marin is white now, his face is naturally pale, and he doesn't need to put on powder. Seeing that Marin, the protagonist of this celebration banquet, vomited blood, everyone naturally couldn't dance happily, and took the opportunity of dancing. Men and women happily rubbed each other. So, the dance ended in a hurry, and those unimportant businessmen and ladies left one after another. Next, it was the negotiation of the distribution of the fruits of victory. After all the bystanders left, Marin, who had just fallen on Khan's shoulder and pretended to be sick, was instantly revived, and entered the inner meeting room with Lübeck Grand Speaker Tagfact and Hamburg Grand Speaker Heisenberg in high spirits. Lübeck Grand Speaker Tagfact said to Marin, who had just vomited blood, with concern, "Lord Marin, are you okay? Otherwise, let's talk about it tomorrow." Marin immediately shook his head and said, "It's okay. I've been to Rome and received the blessing of the current Pope Julius II. I'm very strong. What's a little injury?" Seeing that Marin could still hold on, the three began to negotiate. According to the opinions of Grand Chancellor Tagfact and Grand Chancellor Heisenberg, the three parties would naturally share the spoils equally. How could Marin be happy with this? So, Marin frowned and said, "Two speakers, this is not right, right? Although we are allies in this war, the main force of the battle is my 38,000 troops, right?" The armies of Lübeck and Hamburg did not seem to participate in this decisive battle outside the city. Hamburg Speaker Heisenberg said unconvincedly, "Who said Hamburg didn't have any? Didn't we send 10,000 people to participate in the war?" Marin looked at Heisenberg with a weird look, and then said faintly, "Yes, they participated in the war, and no one died. They all surrendered without resistance." Heisenberg's face was immediately embarrassed, and he retorted, "Without our 10,000 people to attract the enemy's attention, your reinforcements may not be able to succeed in the sneak attack. Maybe they will be targeted by the enemy." Marin nodded, "That's true. Your 10,000 people do have this function, but that's all." Chapter 476, The Best Actor and the Division of Interests, Part 2. Heisenberg was immediately dissatisfied, and continued, "After all, my 10,000 people also made a huge contribution." Marin certainly knew that the 10,000 people in Hamburg did make a contribution, but now was the time to negotiate the division of spoils and interests, so it was natural to downplay the other party's role and exaggerate one's own role. So, he said, "Indeed, Lord Heisenberg, your 10,000 men from Hamburg did divert some of the enemy's attention. However, don't forget that war depends on strength. Without the assault of my 18,000 troops, and without defeating the intercepting Swiss mercenaries and capturing Joachim I, this battle might not be won. After all, war still depends on the strength of the army. Although your 10,000 men are useful, if they don't have my reinforcements, can they defeat the enemy? No, they will only end up being captured." Grand Chancellor Heisenberg didn't know what to say for a moment, but after a while, he smiled and said, "Speaking of your 18,000 reinforcements, I almost forgot that they were transported by a fleet borrowed from Hamburg. Without Hamburg's ships, they would still be in the Duchy of Schleswig and couldn't come over. You see, how important Hamburg is." Marin was stunned and found that it was really the case. However, he still forced himself to say, "Without Hamburg providing ships, my 18,000 men can still reach the battlefield by land." Grand Chancellor Heisenberg said proudly, "Don't think I don't understand military affairs. I know very well that the old fox, Elector Frederick III of Saxony, has sent many scouts to gather information on the land in the north. If your 18,000 troops had gone by land, they would have been discovered long ago. If they were blocked halfway, perhaps the war would have failed. Therefore, taking the sea route is actually very important to avoid the Saxon scouts. Moreover, as far as I know, the noise of us recruiting soldiers in Hamburg and conscripting men outside the city has attracted the enemy scouts outside the city into the city. Coupled with the curfew, the possibility of being discovered and the reinforcements landed was avoided. So, Hamburg's contribution is great." At this time, Marin's heart was roaring with 1,000 horses, because, these were all what Marin had told Heisenberg in the letter before. After all, Hamburg's cooperation was needed at that time, so Marin naturally had to explain the reasons in the letter in order to get the other party to cooperate actively. Unexpectedly, it has now become an excuse for Hamburg to take credit. Seeing that both Marin and Hamburg were desperately bragging about their own merits, Lübeck Grand Speaker Tagfact was naturally unwilling to lag behind. However, he did not understand military affairs and did not know how to brag about Lübeck's contribution professionally. But he would make a fuss. So, Grand Speaker Tagfact said shamelessly, "Ahem, let me say a few words. I think what you two said just now makes sense. Of course, our Lübeck's contribution to this war is also huge. Marin and Heisenberg were stunned. You Lübeck also made a huge contribution. Why didn't we know?" Seeing that the two allies had an expression of, "I don't believe it," Tagfact certainly couldn't show weakness. So, he worked his brain quickly, and kept talking. "Well, you two have also seen that the walls of our Lübeck city are tall and strong. Moreover, it is surrounded by water, which is easy to defend and difficult to attack, and that." "Wait." Marin suddenly interrupted Tagfact's intermittent speech, and asked with a puzzled look on his face, "I know that Lübeck is easy to defend, but what contribution did it make in the decisive battle? It seems that we didn't fight the decisive battle in Lübeck." Tagfact was suddenly at a loss for words, but as an old politician for many years, he still reacted quickly. He argued, although the decisive battle was not fought in Lübeck, was the bread of your army made by the bakers in Lübeck? Marin was a little stunned. "Does this count? Then I purchased a large amount of bread from the Archbishop of Bremen along the way. Doesn't that mean that they also made a great contribution this time?" This. Tagfact worked his brain quickly. Then, he seemed to have thought of his words, and said confidently, "For this war, we can't just look at the last battle, right? We have to look at the early stage as well. Just tell me what contribution Lübeck made." Hamburg Grand Speaker Heisenberg said impatiently. If Lübeck was not the leader and Hamburg was not the deputy leader, Heisenberg would probably have started to criticize him on the spot. At this time, Lübeck and Hamburg, Lübeck is equivalent to the powerful Zwolenghchan, the left leader in swordsman, while Hamburg is equivalent to Buchuan before the rebellion. The strength is not enough to challenge Lübeck, so he must give face. Left leader. No. It's Tagfact. Grand Speaker cleared his throat and said, "In the early stage, the 50,000 soldiers of the Bosse coalition were entrenched under the city of Lübeck and launched many attacks." Marin rolled his eyes immediately. "That was a tentative attack, right? I didn't even use any strength. Relying on the tall, solid and magnificent walls of Lübeck, we repelled the enemy's crazy attack." Marin couldn't help it. "It seems that the army on the top of the city at that time was mainly my 20,000 troops, right?" Tagfact said without blushing, "You have a lot of people, but without the tall walls of Lübeck, your 20,000 people may not be able to withstand the attack of 50,000 troops on the other side. Lord Tagfact, I must remind you that during the decisive battle, my army was in the wilderness west of Lübeck and resisted the enemy for many days. Well. Do you think that our city of Lübeck also delayed the Bosse coalition for a long time? If the Bosse coalition attacked Hamburg early, would Hamburg be unable to defend it? Moreover, there was not enough time to prepare the 10,000 militiamen. Relying on the more than 3,000 useless mercenaries in Hamburg, they can't withstand the attack of the Bosse coalition's 50,000 troops, right?" Hamburg Grand Speaker Heisenberg was immediately unhappy and said unhappily, "It's as if the mercenaries in Lübeck are very strong. I haven't seen your army go out of the city to fight side by side with Lord Marin's 20,000 troops. Well, don't we have to send troops to guard Lübeck? After all, we have to guard against the enemy's sneak attack on Lübeck. Please." At that time, the Bosse coalition had already crossed the river to the west and moved towards Hamburg. There was no threat to Lübeck at all. "Why don't you come out?" Heisenberg said unhappily. Then, he said, "Speaking of the solidity of the city, our Hamburg is not bad. Our city walls are also tall and solid, and our city is also surrounded by water, which is easy to defend and difficult to attack." Seeing that the two great speakers were bragging about their own cities being surrounded by water and easy to defend and difficult to attack, Marin couldn't help it. So he said contemptuously, "Who said that Lübeck and Hamburg are easy to defend and difficult to attack? I have a way to easily capture them." Marin said this, obviously to undermine the self-confidence of the two, and also to take the initiative in the negotiations. Speaker Tagfact and Speaker Heisenberg both had expressions that said, "I won't believe it even if you kill me," and they almost said that Marin was bragging. "It seems that I can't control you without showing off my skills," Marin thought. So, Marin told the two about the Battle of Jinyang that broke out in 455 BC and led to the division of Jin by 3 families, and then explained, you see, the section of the Trave River east of Lübeck is relatively narrow. I can build a dam here, and when the water level is high, I can dig the dam towards Lübeck and use the flood to submerge Lübeck. Similarly, the branch of the Elbe River east of Hamburg is also relatively narrow, which is more suitable for damming the river, and then, it can also burst the dam and submerge Hamburg. As he spoke, Marin saw fear in the eyes of the two great speakers. Tagfact and Heisenberg asked in horror, "Lord Marin, how many people know about this terrible tactic now?" Marin thought for a while, and said, "For now, in Europe, only my subordinate Wolf Esperant and I know about it. As you all know, he once used a flood to drown more than 7,000 Danish elites, and he is also good at this." "No one else?" The two asked tremblingly. "There is no one else in Europe. As for China, there are many." "That's good. That's good. Now Europe has no contact with the Ming dynasty at all, so they are naturally not worried." However, the flooding method mentioned by Marin did scare the two. So, Tagfact and Heisenberg earnestly asked Marin not to spread this evil tactic to prevent the enemy from using this method to capture Lübeck and Hamburg. Marin naturally took the opportunity to make demands, and in the end, Lübeck and Hamburg agreed to give up their territorial claims. After all, they are commercial cities, and giving more land may not be very effective. So, it is better to ask for cash benefits. In the end, the three parties agreed that the territory ceded by the enemy would be obtained by Marin. As for the ransom, the three parties will share it equally. After the successful conclusion of the negotiations, Marin was also relieved. Thinking to himself, if I had known that the flooding method could scare these two guys, I wouldn't have to pretend to vomit blood. I would have just said this method and scared these two guys for a while. However, although the process was tortuous, the result was still equally gratifying. Chapter 477 of the text volume, Go South or North. Marin did not intend to spread the flooding method, because it would not be good for him. Such a means similar to strategic weapons is the most deterrent only when it is held in hand and not thrown out. If it is exposed, it will not be good for Marin. After all, although Lübeck and Hamburg are rich, they have little development potential because of their small territory. If they are fighting for territory and want to compete with him for land hegemony, Marin does not mind spreading the flooding method. But now, seeing that Lübeck and Hamburg are both withered and have given up their land demands, and they will be needed politically in the future. Therefore, Marin does not intend to spread this kind of warfare method that is very terrifying to the two Hanseatic cities. So, in front of the two great speakers, Marin stroked the Bible and swore that as long as the two cities did not compete with him for territory, he would never tell the flooding method, and also forbade Wolf Esperant to talk nonsense. In addition, Lübeck and Hamburg also agreed that before the enemy's ransom was paid, all the prisoners of war would be taken back by Marin to dig the Munster Canal. As for food, it will be borne by Marin himself. Marin naturally has no objection to this. For other countries, the amount of food consumed to feed these 73,000 captives is extremely shocking, but for Marin, it is not a problem. It just so happens that he still has a lot of food to consume. Even if each captive consumes 2 pounds of rye a day, it is only 146,000 pounds a day. In a year, although the food consumption will reach a super astonishing figure of 53.29 million pounds, Marin's granary stores food in units of 100 million pounds, which is completely affordable. Moreover, it is a waste to use 73,000 laborers to dig a small canal. Therefore, Marin plans to adjust the original small canal plan to a medium-sized canal that can accommodate two 200-ton cargo ships running side by side. Of course, this kind of inland river ship must not use a wide ship, but must be made thinner and longer to be more suitable for inland navigation. In the future, the power of these ships will be steam engines. It can be said that this canal is vital to Marin, because it will connect the Ems River and the Lippe River. The Lippe River is a branch of the Rhine River. Connecting the Lippe River is equivalent to connecting the Rhine River and the Ruhr River. In this way, coal can be transported smoothly to the north in the future. Of course, this does not mean that Marin will develop industry on the coast. In fact, the industrial zone Marin is still located in the Ruhr area, and he will definitely annex the Ruhr area in the future. However, this canal transports coal to the coast to supply the coal needs of seafaring ships. After all, it will definitely be the era of steamships in the future. In the future, Marin plans to convert his warships and ocean-going merchant ships into motor sailing ships. When the wind is favorable, turn off the steam engine and use the sails to drive the ship. When it is against the wind or when there is no wind, start the steam engine to drive. Of course, during naval battles, steam engines can also be started to facilitate the pursuit of enemy ships or escape. In this way, a lot of space for storing coal can be saved, and more other materials and goods can be loaded. Although air pollution is inevitable after entering the steam engine era. However, this is the price of development and it is difficult to avoid. In addition, Marin could have just put the industrial zone in the Ruhr area. Capital areas like Aurich don't need to have industry, so there won't be much pollution. Marin is not like some hypocritical people in later generations, who enjoy the fruits of industrial civilization while hypocritically shouting about environmental protection and wanting to deindustrialize. Deindustrialization, is that going to pull people back to an agricultural society? Europe and the United States deindustrialized because China, a new manufacturer, provided them with enough cheap industrial products. If we deindustrialize again, who will provide us with industrial products? Should we rely on Indians or African black uncles? Can you be more reliable? Despite traveling through time, Marin was still worried about the IQ of those who shouted deindustrialization. So, Marin decided that before he died, he would write in his suicide note that whoever shouted deindustrialization would be thrown into the primeval forest, without any industrial products, and left to fend for himself. As long as he dared to make a fire, cook, and pollute the atmosphere, he would be beaten to death. He was forbidden to eat cooked food. Eating cooked food means making a fire, which also means air pollution. After discussing the issue of interest division, the next step is to discuss the next action plan. After all, the tripartite alliance between Marin, Lübeck and Hamburg, Sweden did not participate in the war, so naturally there was no benefit for them, only won the decisive battle. But in fact, Frederick III, the Elector of Saxony, is still on the run, and Denmark in the north has no time to care about it because of the war in the south. So, a very important question is placed in front of everyone next: should we go south or north? Going south is naturally to pursue Frederick III. After all, this guy ran away with hundreds of knights. If he is not caught, the war is not over. Going north means going to Denmark again. Then, landing on Zealand Island and attacking Copenhagen again. This time, Marin will cut a huge piece of meat from the Danes no matter what. In fact, Marin has already thought about it in his heart. After this battle, he can be said to be truly famous in Europe. After defeating 50,000 elite enemy troops, no matter which country's monarchs, they must look at him with new eyes. At this time, the time is ripe to snatch a crown from Denmark. After all, it is a waste for the Danish royal family to occupy both the Danish and Norwegian crowns. One should be given to himself. Thinking about the feeling of being a king, Marin couldn't help but get excited. Duke Marin, after all, doesn't sound as domineering as His Majesty Marin. I support going south. Tag fact: the Speaker of the Lübeck Senate said, if we can't catch Frederick III, the Elector of Saxony, it means that this matter is not over yet. Moreover, if we catch this guy, we can also ask for hundreds of thousands of gold coins. You know, that's an elector, comparable to the existence of a king. Obviously, the electorate of Saxony is rich. At the beginning, although Saxony was divided into two according to the Treaty of Leipzig, it seems that the Duchy of Saxony is not much smaller than the electorate of Saxony. But in fact, the electorate of Saxony is richer. Because, when choosing the land, it was the eldest son, Elector Ernst, who picked it first. As the first person to pick, it is natural to choose an area with more cities and a more developed economy. Therefore, although the entire Greater Saxony region is very developed, the electorate of Saxony is definitely richer than the Duchy of Saxony. The Duchy of Saxony paid Marin a ransom of 1 million golden gold coins at the beginning. Although it borrowed a lot, it was also very rich. If it were another duke, he wouldn't be able to raise that much money even if he borrowed. But the electorate of Saxony would probably be able to raise 1 million gold coins without having to borrow much money. After all, the Saxon Business District is the second largest business district after the Wendy Business District. More importantly, the Saxon region has always been a region with relatively developed handicrafts. Before the Industrial Revolution, the handicrafts in the Saxon region had always been a bright spot in the economy, bringing a lot of tax revenue to Saxony's finances. Therefore, unlike cities such as Lübeck and Hamburg in the Wendy business circle that rely on maritime transport and trade, the Hanseatic cities in the Saxony business circle are responsible for selling the goods produced by the developed handicraft industry in the Saxony region to all parts of Germany in exchange for money and wealth. This model makes the Saxony business circle second only to the Wendy business circle that monopolizes the lucrative trade in the Baltic Sea region, and the second of the four major business circles of the Hanseatic League, and richer than the Rhine business circle with developed shipping. And because foreign trade and local handicraft production can generate a lot of tax revenue, the electorate of Saxony and the Duchy of Saxony, although the terrain in the territory is not flat and the arable land is not very fertile, are still one of the most developed regions in Germany. It can even be said that it is the most developed handicraft region in the German region, excluding the Flanders region and Milan region of the Netherlands belonging to the Holy Roman Empire. It was not until the advent of the steam engine era in the 19th century that the industrial leader status of the Saxony region was suppressed by the Ruhr region, which has a huge amount of coal. Because Saxony's economy is developed, there is a lot of money to be made. Therefore, Tagfac's intention is very clear: we will go south, chase him to the territory of the electorate of Saxony, rob him, and then make him pay a huge amount of compensation. Chapter 478 Let's Go Bully Denmark. Speaker Tagfact has a good plan, very businessmanlike. But Marin has a different idea. Marin believes that this is the best time to go north and defeat Denmark. Although Saxony is rich, Marin is not short of money. Therefore, coveting and seizing Denmark's Jutland Peninsula and the Kingdom of Norway is Marin's biggest goal. As for the electorate of Saxony, what good is there for the army to go there, except for looting? Moreover, even if Frederick III is caught, what do you dare to do to him? He is a very prestigious character among the 7 electors. Once he suffers, many people will definitely support him. Unlike the dog-ignoring nobles like George, Duke of Saxony, the statement is a bit exaggerated. Frederick III is one of the 7 electors and has an outstanding reputation in the imperial parliament. In the original history, Emperor Maximilian I lost the Swabian War and his prestige plummeted. So the German princes, mainly the electors, took the lead in establishing an imperial administration committee that held the main power of the imperial parliament, and the chairman of this committee was Frederick III. It can be said that Frederick III was the leader of the German princes. Although the emperor did not lose the Swabian War due to Marin's intervention, and the so-called Imperial Administration Committee did not appear, this did not hinder Frederick III's huge influence among the German princes. Even in the original history, after the death of Maximilian I in 1519, the electors supported Frederick III to become the Holy Roman Emperor. But considering that the Habsburg family had to take the lead in resisting the powerful Ottoman Turkey, Frederick III took the initiative to give up the throne and support Charles V. It can be seen that Frederick III is a hot potato. If the opponent is caught in the previous decisive battle, it will be fine, but if the troops are chased to Frederick III's lair to besiege the opponent, the other princes in the German region will definitely react fiercely. At that time, the princes might force Marin to withdraw. Otherwise, there will be a wave of unanimous condemnation from all the German princes, at least most of them, and even threats of force. The princes can accept Frederick III's defeat and capture on the battlefield, but if Marin wants to besiege Wittenberg, the capital of the electorate of Saxony, and do demolition, actually robbery, other princes will not sit idly by. After all, the elector of Saxony is the leader of the German princes. If Marin occupies the electorate of Saxony, it is equivalent to challenging the entire German princely aristocratic system. More importantly, Marin was just an unknown little knight before. His appearance and rise in fortune itself challenged the original German aristocratic system. In addition, Marin is the common enemy of the princes Maximilian I, and those princes certainly don't want to see Marin destroy the electorate of Saxony. Therefore, if Marin wanted to attack the electorate of Saxony, he could imagine how the princes would block him. Whether it was political mediation or military threats, other princes would not sit idly by and watch the electorate of Saxony being destroyed by Marin's army. But Marin couldn't refuse them. Otherwise, he would be an enemy of the entire Germany. It was different going north to Denmark, which was not part of the German Empire. Those princes would not help the Kingdom of Denmark when they were full. Only countries like the electorate of Saxony and the electorate of Brandenburg, which had close marriage alliances with Denmark, would speak for Denmark. Since Marin and his allies took away the Duchy of Schleswig and the Duchy of Holstein last time, the current Kingdom of Denmark has nothing to do with Germany. In addition, the electorate of Saxony and the electorate of Brandenburg, which supported Denmark, were defeated by Marin's army, so Denmark is now an isolated and unlucky guy, and Marin can do whatever he wants. Although it is said that if you want to completely annex Denmark, European countries will definitely not agree. However, if you cut off a large area of land from Denmark, such as the Jutland Peninsula, and snatch the Kingdom of Norway, leaving only a few small islands such as Zealandia in Denmark, other countries will still have a hard time saying anything. After all, Marin did not do it completely, and he also retained Zealandia and the Danish crown. According to the prevailing norms of the European aristocracy at that time, the loser must pay the price. Therefore, it is reasonable to let them cede territory and pay compensation. Who told you to lose the battle? But it is different to completely destroy a country. This kind of bad example cannot be set. Otherwise, wouldn't there be continuous wars on the European continent? Do you still want to be aristocrats happily? Of course, if it is in a remote place like the British Isles where everyone can't control it, then there is no way. After all, navigation was not well developed at that time, and everyone was unable to reach out to the remote places like the British Isles. Therefore, the competition for the throne of England was very exciting, but the European countries on the continent could not interfere much. If they wanted to interfere, they had to have ships. On land, especially in the German region where princes were everywhere and knights were as numerous as dogs, if you wanted to do something, you had to consider the opinions of other princes. Unless you are very strong and have many allies. When you annex other countries, there are a group of allies cheering on the side and shouting, 666. Such a great man, everyone will not have any opinions, nor dare to have any opinions. Because you have many brothers, whoever disobeys will be cut. But Marin is different. Since he became a noble with the help of Emperor Maximilian I, he has been labeled as an emperor faction. Maximilian I was mentally retarded when he was young, and he shouted the slogan of centralization and became the public enemy of all German princes. Marin followed the emperor and was actually implicated. Therefore, Marin's desire to lead troops to the electorate of Saxony and the electorate of Brandenburg will definitely cause a backlash from the princes. Perhaps, they will think that this is Marin's attempt to unify Germany as the pioneer of Maximilian I. Marin now regrets following Maximilian I, but it is a bit troublesome to withdraw now. After all, he is now a member of the emperor's faction. If he withdraws from the emperor's faction but is not accepted by the prince's faction, he will be neither inside nor outside. Marin told the two great speakers about his concerns. After thinking about it, the two great speakers had to admit that Marin's concerns were not groundless. Moreover, the people of Lübeck and Hamburg can also vaguely see that Marin has been rejected by most of the nobles. However, it is precisely because of this that Marin needs forces such as Lübeck and Hamburg that are not in the eyes of the nobles as allies. If it were other princes who were doing well in the aristocratic circle, who would be willing to form an alliance with cities dominated by merchants such as Lübeck and Hamburg? Maybe, only when they need to borrow money will they show Lübeck and Hamburg a little bit of good face. Usually, they look down on the merchants of Lübeck and Hamburg. Unless they owe Lübeck and Hamburg a lot of money. Grand Speaker Tagfact and Grand Speaker Heisenberg are also very helpless, and they also understand that as Hanseatic commercial cities, if they go with Marin to trample on the land of the electorate of Saxony and the electorate of Brandenburg and plunder the wealth there, the two cities will become a thorn in the eyes and flesh of the nobles. Fortunately, they won this time. In any case, they will definitely be able to blackmail the two electorates for a large sum of money. Even, they concede some land, although it has nothing to do with them. After all, the victor has the right to do so. Since the electorate of Saxony and the electorate of Brandenburg are a little bit reluctant, then, vent all your anger on the Kingdom of Denmark. Marin has land demands on Denmark, and Lübeck and Hamburg also have their own demands. This time, they plan to force Denmark to give up developing its own maritime trade and let the merchant ships of Lübeck and Hamburg take on the transportation task of Denmark's foreign trade. In this way, there would be no need to worry about Denmark taking the opportunity to revive its navy. As long as Denmark was forced to sign an agreement to completely abandon its navy and hand over all maritime transportation to the merchant ships of Lübeck and Hamburg, then the Kingdom of Denmark would never have the opportunity to rise up and compete with the Hanseatic League. In general, Denmark is easier to bully. So, Marin and the two great speakers unanimously decided, let's go hand in hand to bully the little friend named Denmark. Chapter 479, Your Highness, you have been captured. After discussing the plan, Marin did not send troops in time, but waited for some days. He was mainly waiting for the arrival of the iron shackles. At the same time, in addition to the 25,000 pairs of iron shackles, Marin also commissioned local carpenters to build some wooden shackles, connected with thick ropes, mainly used to restrict the actions of ordinary infantrymen who were not too dangerous. As for the civilians, Marin did not use shackles because they were not needed. In early June, after the iron and wooden shackles arrived, Marin released the prisoners of war who were locked in the courtyard. Then, 5,000 soldiers and 5,000 civilians who had received military training were divided, holding spears, guarding the 73,000 prisoners of war, including 28,000 civilians, to return home first and send them to the northern part of Münster for custody. After discussing with Bishop Conrad, these people will enter the southern part of Münster to participate in the excavation of the canal. At present, only a small part of the canal connecting the Ems River and the Lippe River on the edge of Münster has been dug. These 73,000 prisoners of war went over and took over the excavation of the canal. Of course, it's not just the excavation of the canal. These prisoners of war can also participate in the work of road construction to facilitate transportation in the area controlled by Marin. For ancient Europe, the easiest place for rulers to control is naturally the area reached by the Roman road. Such areas are often easier to control because the court's troops can easily reach them. And in those areas with inconvenient transportation, the influence of rulers is often weakened. Not to mention the 16th century, even in the 21st century, those ravines with inconvenient transportation may not be fully implemented by official requirements. Therefore, for Marin, if he wants to completely control such a large area, the construction of roads is essential. It's rare that there are 73,000 free laborers now. Although the food consumption is large, it can't stand not asking for wages. Marin can take this opportunity to build more roads and dig more irrigation canals. It just so happens that the northern part of Munster, which is the control area taken over by Marin, is now lacking roads and irrigation canals. These laborers can go there to build roads and dig canals, develop these areas, and allow Marin's influence and dominance to arrive smoothly. After sending away the prisoners of war, Marin now has 30,000 main forces and 500 reconnaissance cavalry left. In addition, there are 10,000 civilians who followed from the mainland and 15,000 civilians who were rescued from the Duchy of Schleswig. However, such a lineup is enough to bully Denmark. Moreover, among these civilians, the civilians from the mainland have actually received military training. Although they do not meet the standards of combat soldiers, they can barely be regarded as militia. Therefore, Marin divided 10,000 of the captured spears to 10,000 civilians from the mainland and asked them to serve as escort soldiers. These escort soldiers, composed of civilians, because they have received a long period of military training, are very clear when they march in formation. Turning left and right is also very skilled. Judging from the appearance alone, some people believe that they are regular troops. As long as they don't really fight, no one can tell that they are militia. As for the logistics and transportation work, Marin completely handed it over to the 15,000 civilians sent by the Principality of Schleswig. Although they have no combat experience and have only received a few days of Q training. However, after all, they are civilians and are best at transportation. In this way, although Marin's army has lost 5,000 main forces, it looks like a 40,000 strong army with the addition of 10,000 civilians, which is very bluffing. Of course, the civilians who formed the escorts did not have simple armor made of mahjong mats. Because Marin was prepared for them in advance. So, they just put on a simple white-bottomed black cross vest, even if they acted as escorts. And these white-bottomed black cross vests were also props used by the strong men of the Principality of Schleswig to pretend to be the main reinforcements, and no additional production was required. The road to the north was very smooth, because both the Principality of Holstein and the Principality of Schleswig belonged to their own territory. After arriving at Schleswig smoothly, the remaining palace minister Mikkel told Marin that the Danish crown Prince Christian was still staying in Vard Castle near Esbjerg to recuperate. At this time, Esbjerg was not the important port city in later generations, but just a small fishing village. But Vard to its north was a solid castle. After General Maxime sent the poisoned Prince Christian to the port west of Ribe city, the prince was extremely weak and could not take a long boat ride. Therefore, the ship docked at the small fishing village of Esbjerg a little to the north. After General Maxime fled to the fishing village of Esbjerg with more than 2,000 remnants, he continued to go north with the seriously ill Prince Christian and arrived at Vard Castle. At this time, the extremely weak Prince Christian could no longer withstand the tossing and had to stay in Vard Castle to recuperate. And General Maxime had to take more than 2,000 remnants to defend and garrison here, waiting for Prince Christian to recover. Unfortunately, Prince Christian was poisoned by Cantrera, the most poisonous poison in Europe. Although he vomited most of the poison after getting drunk, some of it still penetrated into his bone marrow and was difficult to remove. Therefore, Prince Christian could not move at all. Otherwise, he would die on the way. In addition, the cavalry under General Maxim reported that the enemy's army had already gone south to Lübeck to participate in the battle, so General Maxim simply stopped and waited for the prince to get better before leaving. As Prince Christian's confidant, General Maxim knew very well that Saxony and Brandenburg had gathered 50,000 troops this time, including 20,000 powerful Swiss mercenaries. Therefore, General Maxim believed that the more than 10,000 enemy troops would be sent to the south. Therefore, he was not worried about the enemy coming again. He even expected the Bosse coalition to go north and join them. Unfortunately, Maxim was wrong. He did wait for tens of thousands of troops, but not from the Bosse coalition, but from Marin. Besieged by 30,000 or 40,000 troops in the small castle of Ward, Maxim was immediately confused. The bombardment of more than a dozen 18-pound short-barreled Karen cannons quickly blasted a hole in the gate of Ward Castle. Then the demolition team stepped forward and successfully blew up the gate. Then, except for a few who resisted stubbornly, most of the more than 2,000 remaining soldiers in the castle surrendered obediently. After all, these soldiers were just recruits who had been in the army for less than a year, not perverts possessed by the god of war. More than 2,000 people could not beat Marin's 30,000 or 40,000 people. Facing tens of thousands of enemy troops, surrender is the most correct way to save his life. Surrounded by bodyguards, Marin came to the luxurious suite where Crown Prince Christian was recuperating and saw the haggard Prince Christian. You know, Prince Christian is only 23 years old, an age of invincible youth. Unfortunately, under the poisoning of Cantrera, Prince Christian is already bald. Moreover, his face was haggard and his mouth was toothless, as if he was a dying old man. Seeing Marin coming in with a large group of armored guards, Prince Christian knew something was wrong. Unfortunately, he was so weak now that it was difficult for him to turn over, so he was too lazy to make any expression. Marin looked at the unfortunate Prince Christian, sighing with regret and a little guilty. Before, he sent people to poison Prince Christian, mainly to prevent him from marrying Catherine of Aragon and causing an alliance between Denmark and Spain. However, now that Catherine is dead, there is no need for Prince Christian to die. Looking at Prince Christian who seemed to be dying, Marin saluted and said, "Your Highness, Marin von Hoffman sends you his greetings." After a pause, Marin added, "In addition, Your Highness, you have been captured." Chapter 480 returned to Copenhagen. However, Marin did not get a response. Although Prince Christian, who was lying weakly on the bed, heard Marin's words, he opened his mouth but said nothing. Because it was useless for him to say anything. At this time, Prince Christian was full of despair. He didn't even know if he could survive this poisoning. Therefore, he was too lazy to communicate with Marin. But Marin didn't think so. Prince Christian was the crown prince of Denmark and Norway. Now, he has fallen into his hands. The living Prince Christian is more valuable than the dead Prince Christian. So, Marin decided to help Prince Christian detoxify. Marin clearly remembered that the solution to the Cantrera poison was to cut open the abdomen of a living mule, then crawl into the abdomen of the mule and immerse the body in the hot blood and internal organs. Relying on this detoxification method, although he was also poisoned by Cantrera, Caesar Borgia survived. As for Alexander VI, he was too old and weak to crawl into the live mule with its belly cut open, so he had to die. And Prince Christian, who was in front of him, was probably not able to crawl into the mule's belly after being tortured by poison for a long time. But Marin felt that it didn't matter whether the blood and internal organs of the mule were in the mule's belly. Anyway, it was just a way to keep warm. So he decided to drain the blood of the mule and remove the mule's internal organs at the same time, put them in a basin, and let Prince Christian soak in it. As for the high-temperature environment required, this is not difficult. Just put it in a closed room with a higher temperature. So Marin ordered the construction of a small house with a con. Of course, Marin couldn't say right away that he saw that Prince Christian was poisoned by Cantrera. Otherwise, wouldn't it be a confession soon? So, Marin pretended to care about the prince and asked how he became like this. Prince Christian didn't have the strength to answer, but General Maxim stood by and answered for him. Marin pretended to try hard to recall, and then said in an uncertain tone, "I think I've heard of this poison that your highness was poisoned with somewhere." General Maxim, the loyal servant, immediately asked excitedly, "Lord Marin, do you know how to detoxify? Our highness has been tortured to death by this poison. You captured him in time, so you should also need a healthy highness, right?" Marin nodded and said, "You are right, I do need a healthy Danish crown prince as a prisoner. However, I am not very sure. That kind of poison, according to reason, people who are poisoned will die after 7 days. How could your prince survive?" Marin asked the question back to General Maxim. 7 days, will die, you mean, this poison was given 7 days before the poison took effect? General Maxim asked thoughtfully. Marin nodded and said, "Yes, this is a rumor I heard when I went to Rome before. According to the rumor, this poison is called Cantrera, and it is the unique poison of the Borgia family, to which the previous Pope Alexander VI belonged. It is extremely strong, but it is a chronic poison. Anyone who is poisoned will die, and it will take 7 days for the effects to take effect." Marin's doubts were not false. Logically, Prince Christian should have died, so how did he survive? After all, Cantrera is so poisonous. At this time, General Maxim suddenly slapped his head and said, "I remember. On the night 7 days before His Royal Highness was poisoned, we were drinking in the prince's tent. It seems that the newly recruited servant under my command took the initiative to pour wine for us and His Royal Highness. It should be. He took the opportunity to poison. Later, this guy disappeared, and a few days later, His Royal Highness was poisoned." Prince Christian was excited at this time and wanted to struggle to get up. General Maxim took a look and hurriedly clarified, "Your Highness, that was not my order. That guy was introduced to me by Holson, and I didn't know he was an enemy. Moreover, I heard from my men that he was drunk the night before he escaped, and suddenly a few words of Swedish came out of his mouth. He disappeared the next day. I suspect that he is a spy for Sweden." Although Prince Christian could not move, his eyes were full of anger at this time. Marin also deliberately said, "Swede." No wonder. General Maxim suddenly bowed at this time, "Lord Marin, since you know this poison, then, do you know how to solve it? His Royal Highness is dying. I think you also need a healthy prince as a hostage. If you know the solution, please save him." Marin pretended to be embarrassed, and then said, "Okay, I'll try." Then, Marin found a living mule, sent his men to violently break open its stomach and take out its internal organs. Then, put a large wooden barrel under the mule's belly to collect the mule's blood. Then, Marin put the wooden barrel full of blood into the room with the Kong, and began to order people to burn fire in the Kong stove to heat the room. Then, he sent people to put the wooden barrel on the Kong in the room to keep the blood and internal organs warm. Finally, he ordered people to carry the weak Prince Christian over, strip him of his clothes, and throw him into the wooden barrel. Marin's idea was not wrong. This can indeed replace the detoxification method of people actively crawling into the mule's belly. However, Marin did not tell Prince Christian how to detoxify, nor did he tell Prince Maxim. Because, maybe one day he would need to use Cantrera to poison people. If people knew how to detoxify, the medicine would be useless. Therefore, when detoxifying, Marin did not tell Prince Christian and General Maxim that it was the blood of a mule, nor did he let them see the process of killing the mule. Before throwing Prince Christian into the barrel, Marin poured a bottle of white powder into the barrel in front of Prince Christian and General Maxim, and said seriously that it was a precious antidote bought from Rome. In fact, it was a bottle of flour. It turned into a paste when poured in. But because it was poured in blood, Prince Christian and Maxim could not tell that it was ordinary flour, because the blood was covered by the blood red and the more eye-catching mule's internal organs. Therefore, Prince Christian and General Maxim thought that the main effect was the bottle of powder poured by Marin, and the blood was probably the solvent. Anyway, Marin's deception achieved its purpose. Finally, as expected by Marin, Prince Christian's poison was resolved and his body began to improve. And Marin, with the army and Prince Christian, who was in good health, headed east. After arriving at the port of Wales, where they had landed on Zealand Island last time, the fleets of Lubeck and Hamburg had been waiting on the sea for a long time. At this time, Denmark had no navy. Zealand was surrounded by warships from Lubeck and Hamburg. Marin's army was about to land, and the ships of the two countries had been waiting here for a long time, waiting to transport Marin's army to Zealand to besiege Copenhagen. After Marin's army arrived, they first expanded the docks of Vale and built many temporary long bridge docks to dock more ships. Then, the ships of Lubeck and Hamburg began to transport Marin's army to the second landing on Zealand. Still starting from Vale, landing at Kalundborg in the northwest of Zealand. Kalundborg also did not have enough docks, but it didn't matter. Marin first sent some engineering troops to land at the Kalundborg dock. Then, they built more temporary long bridge docks to facilitate the docking of more ships. After the temporary docks were repaired, the large-scale landing began. A few days later, Marin's army completely completed the landing and came to the east of Zealand. In the horrified eyes of the Danes, they once again surrounded the Danish capital of Copenhagen.